question here. If someone warned you about 3 months in advance that about 1 million people were about to be killed, they gave you the names of the people planning it, they gave you the location of the weapons where they were hidden, they told you exactly how the entire thing was going to happen, and you did nothing about it, what does that make of you? Because in 1994, this was exactly what the United Nations, the United States, France, and Belgium collectively did to a country in Africa called Rwanda. Now, before we get into how the whole thing happened and how Rwandans ended up killing themselves, we need to go back to Belgium. Yes, that country should not sound familiar to you. Before the coming of the Europeans into Rwanda, there were two groups of people that lived and existed in Rwanda for centuries. These were the Hutus and the Tutsis. This group of people intermarried, they spoke the same language, they followed the same religion. They were literally living together. The only difference between these people was mainly economic. The Tutsis tended to own more cattle. The Hutus tended to own more farmlands. And these identities were fluid in the sense that a Hutu can decide to become a Tutsi by giving up his farmlands and then owning cattle. And then a Tutsi can decide to become a Hutu by giving up his cattle and owning or acquiring more farmlands. And then the Belgians arrived. After World War I, Belgium arrived Rwanda and they took control of the country. When they came with, first they divided the Rwandan population so that they can be able to control it. Then they came with their scientists, Belgian scientists, who measured noses, feet, and foreheads of Rwandans. And it was from these measurements they determined who would be Tutsi and who would be Hutu. That doesn't make any sense, right? Yes, but follow me carefully. In 1933, Belgium issued identity cards to every Rwandan. This identity card tells you who you are, Hutu or Tutsi, and there was no changing it no matter what. Belgians offered Tutsis free education and even gave them positions in government, but the Hutus were blocked from these privileges. And for decades, the Hutus lived as second-class citizens in their own country. In 1962, Rwanda gained her population and Belgium left. And by the time this happened, majority of the Hutu population had already gained power in government. And then between 1959 and 1994, there were repeated waves of violence coming from the Hutu population to the Tutsi population. Hundreds of thousands of them fled the country, went to neighboring countries like Congo, Burundi, Uganda, living as refugees. And one of the men from the Tutsi population that fled the country was Paul Kagame. He was living in Uganda, training himself as a soldier. And in 1990, Kagame's army, called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, invaded Rwanda. And then a civil war broke out between the Hutu government and Kagame's rebel forces. After 3 years of fighting, the two parties decided to come to a consensus. They agreed they were going to form a unity party. They were going to rule together. And then the United Nations sent a peacekeeping force to ensure that everything went well for them to sign a deal and come to an agreement. This peacekeeping force was made up of 2,500 soldiers and it was commanded by a man named General Romeo Dallaire. When General Romeo got to Rwanda, he felt something was wrong. Because the Hutu extremists or the Hutu government didn't look like they wanted to sign any peace deal. As a matter of fact, they were strategizing. They had a militia camp outside the city where they were training men actively. They had a radio station that was broadcasting anti-Tutsi propaganda every day, calling the Tutsis Inyenzi, meaning cockroaches. They had weapons stockpiled. And eventually in January 1994, General Romeo was able to get credible information that what he noticed was actually true. He got an informant from the Hutu militia, a trainer inside the camp, told him that there were weapons ready, that they had all their plans mapped out, and with the amount of weapons they have and with how fast they could distribute it, they would be able to kill about 1,000 Tutsis within 20 minutes. He even gave him the location of the weapons cache. And then General Romeo decided to act on this information. So on January 11th, he sent a fax, an urgent fax to the United Nations. He described everything to them, told them the situation of things, and then asked for permission to raid this weapons cache. As it was something he described as an extermination plot against the Tutsis. But the United Nations responded quickly, told him that, oh no, he shouldn't do that. He shouldn't raid the weapons cache. It was not a part of his mandate, that he was there to make peace, and that he should rather report the incident to the Rwandan government. The Rwandan government was literally the one in charge of the upcoming genocide. General Romeo didn't understand what he was reading, so he sent more messages, more warnings, more pleas. He kept calling, but all of this was ignored. 3 months later, on April 6, 1994, the president of Rwanda died in a plane crash. A missile hit him, the plane he was in, at the Kigali airport just after he had landed. Nobody knows who was responsible for this. Some people claim it was the Hutu extremists who were looking for a reason to carry on or to launch their genocide plan. Some people say it was the Tutsis, who was led by Paul Kagame. But in all of this, 30 minutes later, after that plane went down, Colonel Bagosora, the man who was the mastermind for the entire genocide plan, issued roadblocks. Every part of the road was blocked. If you were a Hutu, you were allowed to move on. If you are a Tutsi, you were pulled aside and eventually shot and killed. Friends were killing friends. Neighbors were killing neighbors. Wives were being killed by husbands. Husbands were giving machetes to kill their wives if she was a Tutsi. And the world did nothing about it. As a matter of fact, some people ran to churches, hospitals, schools, wherever they felt safe. It was reported that between April 16 and April 17th, about 5,000 to 10,000 people were massacred in a Catholic church because the priest told them they were welcome, they could feel safe in the church. And then he went around and then he called the Hutu extremists and he identified the Tutsis amongst them, and they were killed. Roadblocks were set up, and by April 7th, the next morning, every part of the country was on fire. Everybody was getting killed. Radio broadcasted names of Tutsi people, their addresses, their descriptions. Listeners were told on the radio that they should go to their neighbors' houses and look out for any sign of a Tutsi. And what did the world do while this whole thing was going on? Let's start with Belgium. On April 7th, 1994, a day after the entire killing started, 10 Belgian peacekeepers were murdered. And then Belgium announced that it was pulling her troops from Rwanda. The country that planted this seed, the country that started this, was running away from it. And then on April 11th, the Belgian soldiers got the news and then they left. And when they left, initially they were stationed at a school that had over 2,000 Tutsis seeking refuge there. When these Belgian soldiers left, Hutu extremists walked in and every single one of the 2,000 persons there was killed. The United States had satellites over Rwanda. They saw the massacre, they saw the roadblocks, they saw the mass graves that were being dug, and they did nothing about it. France didn't even send troops. France didn't pay attention to what was happening. The United Nations Security Council set up a meeting, and then they decided that it was wise for General Romeo to come back, to withdraw. They reduced General Romeo's soldiers from 2,500 soldiers to 270 soldiers after General Romeo refused. He called it an immoral act. He was supposed to be stopping a genocide, not run away from it. But then 270 soldiers cannot stop a genocide. On July 4th, 1994, exactly 100 days after the genocide started, Paul Kagame and his army were able to retake Kigali, and that was when the genocide stopped. About 2 million Hutus fled the country. They were scared of revenge. General Romeo went back to Canada after Rwanda and he suffered severe PTSD. He attempted suicide a couple of times. He was able to describe what happened to him in a book that he wrote called Shake Hands with the Devil. He said in Rwanda, he shook hands with the devil and the devil let him go. Eventually, a new government was formed and Paul Kagame emerged as the president of Rwanda. And Rwanda did one of the most remarkable things in modern history. They decided to rebuild their country together. They removed the word Hutu and Tutsi from their official identity cards. Today, Rwanda is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the continent with the highest number of women in parliament anywhere in the world. So always remember Rwanda, a country that came back from the absolute bottom. Tell me in the comments the part of this story that shocked you the most, because for me, it was the fact that Belgium planted a seed of discord and ran away, and about 1 million people paid for it. I'm Miriama, and I tell war stories without confusion. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.